Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Derek Cohen. He's our Chief of Policy and Research. So I'm the comms guy. He's the policy guy. So you get both sides of it all the time. Well, let's jump into our hot take right here at the top. The biggest news, of course, is that they had the vote yesterday on the Epstein files in the House, 472-1. And I think we're all still figuring out why William Clay decided to vote against it. But do you think, and we won't go into the salacious details, obviously that's not what this, it's not that, this is a
William
family.
Clay,
Was it, who wasn't it?
Clay Higgins.
Clay Higgins. Sorry, not William Clay. Yeah, that's a very different.
I was about to say, if he voted on that was, I don't know. I know they hold the vote open for a while, but my goodness, man, come on.
All right, Clay Higgins and his wife are still trying to figure out why he voted no yesterday. So we won't go into those details, but I am curious to know, do you think that this is it? Do you think this is the last time we're going to hear about this? We're going to get the files, and then it's all going to be out there, and we're finally going to move on to other issues?
No, because, I mean, this is the nature of conspiracies, essentially, is that, you know, there's never one irrefutable like summation of it. You know, let's suppose this comes out and it's full of damning information, which again we discussed before. I don't think it's going to be, but it's full of damning information. Then it'll be like, okay, but who was redacted from it?
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? And this is kind of the issue with releasing any form of grand jury or investigative material is absent the context of that investigation at the time that it's actually recorded. You really don't know what it is. So you might have folks in there, appearing in like cameos, shows in the 80s when like some random star would be there. And like they're there, but they have no defensible business being there. But that doesn't necessarily indicate criminal guilt. It just means that they came up in a conversation.
At least that's what Bill Clinton's going to tell everybody.
Well, I mean, he's got other things that I saw over the weekend that made me stay off the internet for the rest of the weekend. So.
One thing I know about conspiracy theories is that if you pile on more information about the conspiracy theory, it'll end the conspiracy theory.
Yeah. Or that's what they want you to think.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's. I think you're right. I think it's. It'll just create more stuff for people to talk about.
What do you think is going to be the craziest thing that comes out of there?
I don't know. I was trying to think of for our hot take, what is the one thing that you wouldn't be expecting that would be completely out of left field that would come out of there, and to find out that Epstein was really broke the whole time, or wasn't his island or something.
I borrowed his island from a buddy. No, I'd probably go with Shark Tank pitches.
Okay.
I can definitely see like Sharks. It's like Uber, but for sandwiches or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
And it's just things where you're just like this. How did this guy get so much money if he's this dumb?
Okay, well, let's get to the real reason why we're here today. Housing affordability has become a national priority, with rising costs putting pressure on families, businesses, and entire communities. According to a March 2025 analysis by the National Association of Home Builders, 75% of U.S. households cannot afford the average price of a new home. Home ownership costs take up 47% of median household income, and that's usually supposed to be around 30%, so much, much higher. The U.S. is still millions of housing units short, and adjusting for inflation, home prices have risen far faster than income since the 1970s. All this is probably why our guest today says, quote, affordability has probably never been as bad as it is today. Sean Dobson is chairman, CEO, and CIO of Amherst, a real estate investment firm. Sean has more than 30 years of experience in U.S. real estate and has guided Amherst to become a leader in the housing market. Today, we'll talk with Sean about the many forces driving housing costs, from market dynamics, construction, innovation, policy, and more. Sean, thanks for being on The Right Idea with us today.
Well, thank you guys for having me. It's great to be here.
So the question I had when I was asking around about this is, the first question I had, I want you to tell you a little bit about your company and your background, but the one I wanted to get to first was, I don't have any idea about what goes into the cost of actually building a house. I mean, I know there's materials and all of that, but I think for a lot of people, when they talk about housing affordability, everybody jumps right to the market and housing supply and those kinds of issues. But even just the cost of a house, what goes into the base price of why a house costs what it costs?
Well, it's a great question. I would say that from the big picture, the cost of a house is about 2/3 labor. So as labor costs go up, housing prices move with it in tandem. About a third of the cost is that leaves materials. So that's being sort of very like straightforward about once you know what you're going to build and you have the permission to build it, your breakdown of your cost at that point forward about 2/3 labor, 1/3 materials. Now, in that what we call the product specification piece, there's quite a lot of regulation and there's quite a lot of requirements that are all dictated at the very, very local level. Think of it at the city level. And oftentimes there might even be a subdivision smaller than the city level with how your HOA is organized that prescribes how the house needs to look, like what features it needs to have, its size, its scale, where's the garage. Mm-hmm. So the product definition is decided locally. The process to get permission to build it is determined and decided locally. And then from there, you have about 2/3 labor and 1/3 parts.
Let's talk a little bit about Amherst. That's great. I was planning to like dig deep into that question, but it makes all the sense in the world that 2/3 of it would be labor and only 1/3 of it is price. Is that actually? I will dig a little bit. Does that, does that fluctuate at all? I mean, is there? Because I haven't even thought about that from a policy standpoint. We never talk about labor.
We build houses a bunch of different ways, right? So we partner with home builders. We build them on site. We build them off site. We act as general contractor. We own our own real estate development division. And we also own a factory. We repositioned a factory that we purchased down in Cuero, Texas. That was a 100-year-old textile mill that we removed the textile mill that had been sold a long time ago and had been dormant for 15, 20 years, and brought it back to life as a modular home manufacturing facility. And modular just means built off-site. Modular is not a kind of a home. It's a way to build a home. It's a construction technique, not a product. That can kind of flip that quotient a little bit, where a little less of your expense is labor, and that brings the cost down a little bit. But it's not sort of a change of pace. It's single-digit percentages of that ratio.
It's funny. I didn't realize this, but like so many times I'll like just go to like, one of those big box hardware stores like Home Depot or Lowe's, and I'll, end up in the back corner somewhere, and I'm like, wait a minute, those are my cabinets. Like it feels like that sometimes that they just, went over to Home Depot and packed everything up on a truck and then went over and built my house.
A lot of times that do. A lot of times, now we own our own cabinet manufacturing business as well, but a lot of times those cabinets are made, they can be made in a foreign country and shipped in and then brought to your home site and bolted down. And that's what I like to point about, modular construction has a negative reputation, negative connotation, but we point out to people that many components of your home were not manufactured on site. Mm-hmm. So your flooring was assembled someplace else, your ceiling, your rafters were assembled someplace else, and many times your cabinets were assembled someplace else. But in modular, we actually take the home down to usually 2 components, and the flooring's down, the appliances are in, the cabinets are in, it's ready to go. And then we bring those 2 pieces in on a truck and with a crane, place them and put them in place. So that brings down your costs a little bit, but you trade off some labor costs for some crane and transportation costs. But the key thing with modular is that you can respond quicker. So my factory modular, our factory in Cuero is rated to build about 700 homes a year. Right now we're probably building 200. If I wanted to go to 700, it would take me a matter of a couple of months. Whereas if I wanted to go stand up that capacity to build on site, it would take much longer.
Could the average person, and maybe above average, I don't know, but could the average, is there enough information out there that, let's say you had a piece of land, could the average person figure out how to build their own home based on what's out there, or is it just kind of like an iPencil situation where nobody actually knows how to put it together? A Bastiat fan, all right, fantastic. But nobody actually knows how to assemble it, but enough people do that you can make a pencil.
If this was on your ranch out in the county somewhere, you could figure it out, right? Because the county doesn't have that many restrictions on what you build. If you bought a lot in a city, in any city, even the most friendly, most kind of city that wants to have growth and isn't anti-development, I think it would be very difficult because the product specifications the city makes are incredibly specific. So you'd have to have an architect that can draw a house that's consistent with all those regulations. Then you have to understand the process to get the plans approved and then have each stage of the home inspected. And then, of course, the way that the ecosystem works is everyone that's involved in building your home is really a specialist. So the person that sells foundations doesn't sell frames. and they don't sell Romex, so they don't do electrical, they don't sell plumbing, and they're not licensed and certified to do those things either. So it's a little bit more like an operating room, I think, than anything else, because you have these specialists that just do one thing. Mm-hmm. So, and they're regulated, and they're licensed. So it really is probably not what Henry Ford would have expected when it comes to how to build products, high quality products, low cost and at speed, because you have entire companies that just do foundations.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Well, I want to drill into that just a little bit, specifically on, you mentioned the regulation, that kind of driving up costs, because I think it's no surprise to anybody. We have a lot of younger staff here who lament their, we'll just say the purchasing power of the dollars we put in their pocket. And I can say, just from observational experience, we see the dollars that we pay, it's a lot hard. The first rung on the ladder, is a little higher up than it was back in our day, Brian. And so I think that we feel that, or they feel that a lot in the younger cohorts too. So I want to talk a little bit about those regulations, those rules, some of those laws that actually contribute to that affordability, and that create that higher overhead for building a house, and then and distally selling it off to a younger first-time homeowner.
Yeah, I mean, so let me pause here by saying that you can go pretty far down the road to say the regulations are too high, and they probably are, but it's not going to solve the problem. Right? The regulations are adding something to the cost, but they're not adding the difference between what people can afford and what houses cost. But the things that we think probably deserve some attention, there's two things I think that deserve attention, and they're kind of controversial. So hopefully your podcast isn't viewed by that many people, because I might get in trouble.
We'll make sure our moms are bracing for it when they listen, sir.
So the two things, one of the big things is our average home is around 1,600 square feet, and our average garage is almost 400 square feet. So the garage is actually a pretty decent percentage of the footprint. And if you think about a garage versus a living room, okay, what's the difference in building cost? It's not much. Some flooring you put down, because our garages have insulated walls. Our garages have finished ceilings. That's what the market expects. So I have this 400 square foot room to store cars. That, by the way, no one stores their cars in.
Right.
That we estimate costs us about $40,000 to build. And by the time we put our administrative margins and try to make a profit on it, it's going to cost the consumer $50,000 or $55,000. And I don't think they want it, and I don't think they need it. And I think they would rather have that $55,000 in their pocket or at some other portion of the home than in the garage. So I think that's a simple one of like, why do we have so many garages when I think in 10 years we're going to have fewer cars? If the self-driving car, there's a huge amount of investment in self-driving cars. If that investment pays off, we're going to have a lot of empty garages around. And I think that it's an aesthetic thing of like, I want the cars put away. But most of the time, the city regulation that requires you build a garage is not paired with a regulation that says you have to use it. So there's a little bit of a weird thing there, right? Mm-hmm. The other one I think that's more controversial, but we're thinking about, is there is a model. I'm glad that my PR people can't get the hook on me right now.
Here we go.
There's a model in that I'm familiar with. I'm not an expert in regulations. But I'm pretty familiar with California regulations and with Texas regulations. And there's an ADU regulation that was mandated by both state governments that says we appreciate the city has its role, and we appreciate that you're very active in what gets built in your city, how it gets built. But whatever you do, it can't confine the ADU by more than these constraints. Or basically what they said was that we're going to define what an ADU is from a product perspective. And we're going to tell you the maximum setbacks that you can require from your lots. Mm-hmm. So now we don't think ADUs are actually going to solve the housing crisis, because the practicality of having another residence in your backyard isn't creating like a panacea for housing supply. It's really creating just more housing space for rich people. However, it is an interesting thing that the model of a state law that got involved in the definition of housing product has been successfully deployed.
I want to jump in. The garage thing is so interesting because just personally, my wife and I, we always talk about our garage. We can't, she has a Tahoe. It won't fit. I mean, literally, you have to put the bumper on the back wall, and then the garage will barely come down over the back of the car, and then you can't get out. Like, you have to, if you're in the passenger side, you'd have to go through the driver's side in order to get out, into the house. So it doesn't fit. So we don't put our cars in there. It's just storage, basically. And so we complain about the use of our garage all the time, and then you go around our neighborhood, and I'm not kidding, like at least a third of the garages in our neighborhood are like man caves, or they've got their their golf simulator or something in there.
And the cars are parked outside. So the regulation says you have to have a garage. I think the implication of the regulation is you have to get your cars off the street because people don't want to look at cars on the street. That's the goal.
Sure.
But that's not what the regulation says. The regulation says that whoever designed and builds the home has to put a garage, and you should see how specific the regulations are. The garage has to be a certain number of feet off of the road. It can't be it can't stick out more than a certain number of feet from the main body of the home. It can't be under a certain size. And so it's just an example of how well-intended regulation, and I say this all the time because I'm a small person, I'm a small government person, I'm a huge person, but I'm a small government person by kind of political leaning. I like the government to do the really big things that we can't do, like fight wars. But if you left developers to their own devices, we might build favelas, right? You might have like slums and dangerous housing built. So there is definitely a place for regulation. And one of the amazing things about the subprime crisis that we got right and people got wrong is they assumed that the houses were subprime and they depreciated the house's value, but the houses were all built to a very high standard because the houses had to meet all these local zoning requirements. So the houses had high quality lumber and high quality craftsmanship and inspections for electrical, inspections for plumbing. So you need all of these things. But as with all good regulations, when the regulations seem to never be finished. So someone at some point decided, well, we need to have garages, and we need to have minimum setbacks, and we need to have minimum lot sizes. And those are all things where the government is deciding the product for the consumer. And where the government has done that, they've driven up the cost to a certain extent.
You said I read a recent article in Forbes in which you were interviewed and quoted. You said something, again, provocative. Quote, affordability has probably never been as bad as it is today. Saying the affordability today is the worst that it's ever been. So that's the bad news. The good news is you said that 4 days ago, and things could have changed in 4 days. So how do you see it today?
You go buy all the houses you can. It's all over. Yeah. So when we say that, it's not a casual observation. So we're in the housing business. Our customers, we're a financial services platform. So we're an investment manager by business model. And we manage money on behalf of our target customer base for investors are probably the largest 300 to 500 investors in the world. So it's a very narrow customer base, but they invest very large quantities of capital. So we're watching the housing market very closely, and we watch it at the address level. So we think of with the S&P 500, of course, is 500 stocks. And so I think all the traded stocks in the U.S. are something like 7,000 or 8,000 different companies. There are 40 million, there's 185 million single family detached houses. There's about 45 million mortgages. And Amherst has built a system that monitors each of those just like the stock market. So we value every house pretty much every day. We understand what the cash flows are for the home. And we have models that are helping us to anticipate what's going to happen with home prices. And one of the fundamental inputs to our model, it's actually called the fundamental line in our model, is what is the buying power of the cross section of the consumer base that represents the demand side of the housing equation? And then what is the actual cost of the home to buy? And you want those two things to be relatively aligned because that means that the market is trading with significant depth. If you need to sell more houses, they'll sell fine because they're very affordable to the population. That metric of the actual cost of the home relative to that buying power of the cross section of the U.S. population that should be home buyers has never been more out of whack. So you would think that home prices were in a situation where they might fall precipitously because the last time that they were at this type of affordability metric, the way we measure it, was in 2007. And they went down 35 or 40% in 2 years.
Did something happen around 2007? I can't remember.
Yeah, there was a small hiccup that almost reset the whole Western world's economy. So I think that when you're in an environment like this, first of all, you have to be careful, and second of all, you have to think about what are those precipitating events that could cause the asset class to reprice. Now, what caused housing to trade at prices that seemed unsustainable in 2007? Was a bunch of fraudulent mortgages being originated and mortgages that were also structured in a way that expanded what we call the buying power for the average consumer. So if a person would go and apply for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, they might get approved for $250,000 loan. But if they applied for a pay option arm with a 1.5% teaser, they might get approved for a $500,000 loan. So as people speculated in housing and as the mortgage market gave the same type of income earner way more buying power, all of that showed up in excessive home prices. What caused home prices to look excessive today is actually a different function. It's the mortgages that people have are incredibly affordable. They're incredibly well structured. The credit underwriting has never been better. The credit losses for the mortgage market have never been this low. So it wasn't an excess of credit issue that's caused home prices to look unaffordable. It's the rapid change in home prices post-COVID. So home prices went up 50% in 3 or 4 years. And that happened because interest rates got to be very, very low, even while incomes were rising. And that's not supposed to happen. And that creates this massive change in buying power for your average consumer. That change in buying power, basically how much money someone can borrow in a notional bill, like how many dollars could they borrow? That showed up in home prices. And then the Fed realized that they had kept rates too low for too long. They jerked interest rates back up. So now when you go to look at, geez, if I had to pay today's price for the home and fund it with today's cost of mortgages, it's just the math doesn't work.
Right.
And that's so it happened here because of monetary policy and fiscal policy conspired to create a bubble. It could basically conspire to raise the price of assets and lower the price of currency. And then we reset the returns on the currency. And the unfortunate part about this is that home prices could seem unaffordable for a really long time. There is not a repricing catalyst that we can find that suggests that this affordability issue is going away anytime soon.
So you mentioned 2007 and obviously the movie that came out, The Big Short. I think everybody has I don't want to say romanticized because that's definitely not the villainized maybe view on several of these policy options, but yet we're seeing some of them actually being discussed now, whether it's the return to opportunities for subprime lending, whether it's the 50-year mortgage.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we definitely need to ask you about that, but go ahead.
See, I will put a pin in that. What do you think? What makes you think that or why do? Let me ask this question a different way. Why do people think go to the same well time and time again, despite the proximity of these particular products and solutions to the problems that actually occurred? Yet nothing new's under the sun, so they go right back to the same well. What seems so attractive about this kind of knee-jerk response to affordability by, relitigating the old song?
Yeah, I mean, we don't spend too much time with elected officials on these issues. We respond to all their requests, and we support them in any way they can. And we're thrilled that some people are finally, more motivated to understand what's going on in the housing market. But a lot of what you see is really the purpose of these ideas is not to change the situation; it's to lower the temperature from their electorate, right? So they're not really like the 50-year mortgage. I mean, the average person stays in their house for 6 or 7 years, so they don't even need a 30-year mortgage. They really don't need a 50-year mortgage. It's just a way to get the monthly payment down, and it lowers the payment about $300 or $400, which is going to help somebody because somebody is $300 or $400 a month short on qualifying. And remember that if the mortgage payment goes up $100, your income has to go up $300 because you're required to have $3 of income for every dollar of mortgage payment that you owe. So lowering the payment down by $300 or $400 means that someone can make $1,000 less and still get the same mortgage. Is it a good idea for the consumer? I don't love it. Is giving the consumer more buying power okay? Probably, but it's not going to move the needle. I mean, we're so far off. I mean, this is. The difference is like $1,200 or $1,400 a month, which means the difference is like $3,000 or $4,000 a month in gross income between making the math work and the math not working. Mm-hmm. So these are all pebbles in the ocean.
Maybe we needed to start with your definition of what is affordable. Because you've got all the pieces, like what is the mortgage, what is the interest rate? What is the cost of the house? What is your mortgage going to be every month? What is your down payment? What is there a working definition in your world about what is and is not affordable?
I spent 35 years in the mortgage-backed securities market and took a lot of credit risk in the subprime space and priced a lot of subprime risk. We can tell you that when the consumers, this is a very rough metric, And it's kind of odd how consistent this is. But when a consumer's principal, monthly obligations for housing, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, PITI, when those exceed a third of their gross income, that consumer is going to be stressed, and any blip in their financial situation, the economy, puts them at great risk of default. So we would think that the goal for the nation would be that someone that's got a good job and is doing their part can get into a house with no more than about a third of their gross income as their full obligation for payments. And that's everything: principal, interest, tax, insurance. Doesn't include the $5,000 you need to have hanging around in case the HVAC blows up, or the $8,000 you need to have around whenever the roof finally goes. But I think that's the metric. And if that's the metric you're after right now, for the people that would like to be buying homes, that PITI number is closer to 60% of their gross income. And that's gross. That's pre-federal tax, pre-state tax, pre-groceries, pre-Netflix.
I want to talk about the T's in that PITI, because that is probably if it's not housing affordability, it's property taxes is the number one issue in Texas from a legislative standpoint. You've got the governor coming out. He's going to be very aggressive over the next 2 years and going into the 90th legislature trying to do something about property taxes. I think we would say he is correctly pointing the finger at the local governments who control property taxes and the rates and what people pay. The legislatures tried to do their best to try and replace some of that, to try and get property taxes down. Again, in your area, since you can't do anything about what local governments charge for their property taxes, but it obviously affects. It's one of the four big things that you look at in terms of affordability. How much does that matter to you?
Well, it's huge. It's in Texas, since we don't have an income tax, the revenue is sourced through property taxes. And I think philosophically, I kind of like it, because it means you are taxed for having things. You're not taxed for making money. You're taxed for having money. So it's actually a very progressive tax policy. Surprised that more states haven't picked up on it. But the fact is that one of the questions that I always like to drive people to is they talk about the housing crisis. I like to back them into who are we trying to help? Who are we trying to serve? Because there's not one solution that solves everyone. So people come to Amherst and they say, what are we going to do about the homeless situation? And I'm like, well, we donate some money to a person here in Austin that probably has as close as I've seen to a solution. But that's a whole group of services that need to be delivered to a person when they find themselves in that situation. So if we talk about, is the housing crisis for, the single mom who's making $55,000 a year, and if we want her to be a homeowner, then we have to come up with a home that we think is going to cost $1,000 a month, and we can't figure out, given the constraints we have, how we're going to have $1,000 a month home that's going to be a safe place to live and a good place to live. So that seems like a shared housing solution. So we always like to back into okay, if we're going to define this housing problem, who are we trying to solve? Which problem are we trying to solve? Now, if we're talking about the kind of millennials that have formed a family and would like to own their home, and they're making $120,000 a year, $140,000 a year, and there's two incomes in the home, the property tax is a huge issue. In our rental portfolio, the rents in Texas hover right around 6.5% of the price of the home, and our average property tax is around 3% of the price of the home, which means that nearly half of the rent is going to property taxes. Now, I think the governor has focused on that and trying to create more of a progressive version so that people that are just getting started can direct more of their income into investing in the home and less of it into the tax burden. But the political difficulty of this is that you'll hear the same people say, well, I don't have any kids. You'll have one family say, I don't have any kids in the school. Why am I paying all these school taxes? And the very people that probably need to benefit from exemptions around these school taxes are the ones that have kids in the school. So it becomes a political hot potato. But it's in Texas, it's a third or 40% of your total cost of housing are property tax.
Do y'all make considerations for that in certain areas whenever you're pricing homes?
Absolutely. One of my most sophisticated models is anticipating not only the property taxes for the home in the first year, but the next 5 years. So we model up the behavior of local governments and how they translate inflation into property taxes. They're all different, by the way.
You've mentioned, solving the housing crisis or affordability for, particularly for not necessarily for homeless people, but just people who are stuck in the middle who either can't move or can't afford it. What role, what kind of perception do people have about renting homes right now? I mean, it feels like everybody is saying, all the leadership is saying, well, you shouldn't have to, everybody should own a home. I mean, that's always, I don't know, Derek. I mean, it feels like everybody's always pushing for home ownership. And is renting a property, is that not, is that not ideal?
So first you had me telling the states how to pick a fight with the cities, and now you want me to slaughter the sacred cow of the American dream?
Well, no, I'm just curious because I'm just thinking about my personal experience. We'd like to move out to a particular area outside of Austin, and we're looking at it and we're saying, look, we want to be in that area because of the schools, and if it's not right to buy a home yet, okay, let's rent. And, you look around and it's like, people look at you like you just, insulted their mother or something. They're like, wow, yeah, rent, why would you do that?
I give this speech all the time, and this is the fastest way to get asked to leave a senator's office. But rent is not a 4-letter word, right? and being a renter shouldn't be a euphemism for being unsuccessful, right? But it is. And I spend a lot of time pointing out to people, particularly people my age, that my dad's rule was, if you can't write a check for a car, you can't afford a car, right? Forget about leasing the car. He didn't think you should finance a car. It's a depreciating asset. If you can't write a check for it, that's not the car for you. So go buy a used car. Now what do? We finance cars for $1,000 a month and for 84 months. We're seeing that same mentality come to housing, which is they don't feel emotional about owning it. They have a lot of other investment choices that weren't available when the American dream was to have all your assets in all of your net worth in one asset. Then now they can buy stocks on their iPhone or Bitcoin or whatever. And they're not at all ashamed of being renters. Now, there's a national survey that's about to be published. It's going to show that people feel like that they're being painted with a scarlet letter because they don't own. And they feel like that they're being pointed out as being somehow less successful or less desirable as a neighbor because they don't own it. But I think that from the consumer's perspective, a lot of consumers don't feel connected enough to the location to want to get into a transaction that has a 6% transaction fee, another 4 points lost on the mortgage origination cost. So to buy a $400,000 house, you're out $40,000 in fees day one. And then you're going to suffer those expenses again when you go to sell. And they also don't love the trip to Home Depot to try to unclog the toilet or to fix the HVAC. So a lot of people are preferring. What's interesting is to see how many of our customers have sold their home and moved into one of our homes strictly for the convenience of being able to travel and know that the house is cared for, and one button and all of the home problems, maintenance issues are our issue. So I think that the politicians' view of the sacredness of the ownership thing is very different than the average American's view.
Derek, MRGA, make renting great again? Is that going to take off?
Well, I was just say, I'm. You don't even need to sell me. You're pushing on an open door. I did have to just replace the roof, and after the paperwork alone, I definitely see the value of the model. But also, I guess tying that back to that labor component, though, Sean, I'd like to ask you. You mentioned at the top of the podcast that we have, about 2/3 of the cost of a residential unit being labor. So when I see that, something constitutes 2/3 of that, I always wonder if there's any slack or play in that particular item. Do you think that we have maybe an underdeveloped workforce there that just can't necessarily cover demand? Or is it one that we just don't have the right kind of workforce out there? What are some of the, say, policy response in that area that might help?
I think this is a whole fruitful area for policymakers to explore, which is that we don't, as a nation, as a culture, put the amount of adulation and respect into a bunch of these service jobs that we should. And the consequence is nobody wants those jobs. So there's a chart floating around the internet that's like a 15-year history of the average age of truck drivers by year. and it goes up at a 45-degree angle, which implies that 10 years later, the average truck driver is 10 years older. It means there's no new truck drivers, right? And carpentry, craftsmanship, those things just somehow lost their luster in the last 30 years. And I'm not sure Americans really want those jobs. Now, the flip side is, and this is where my comms team is probably going to just disconnect me from the internet, is that when you look at our immigration policies, right? I'm not a fan of them. I think everyone knows I'm not a fan of them. And it's not that I'm not a fan of us having a robust group of immigrants in the country, because given our birth rates as a nation, we have no choice but to have a very robust immigration policy. But not having work permits, and yet knowing that there are many people out there swinging hammers that are not here legally, is a disservice to all of us. It's a disservice to the person swinging the hammer, and it's a disservice to the rest of us. So I would argue that our lack of immigration enforcement is really a subsidy for this type of work, whether it's construction or whether it's agriculture. And we should just confront it as that and figure out something to do about it that's robust and broad, and not just sort of retract, because it's happening. So I think as immigration enforcement rises, you're going to see construction costs going up, because the cost of getting a kid that graduates from Austin High to go put on a roof versus the cost of having someone who sends that money back to Latin America do it is probably 200%.
So then are you in the camp that these are jobs that Americans won't do, or just we don't price them right?
I'm not in a position to know. I haven't surveyed anybody, but I think that they would. My personal opinion is that the way that we build homes in the United States, it's a hard job to sell. We like our factory because we have careers in our factory. We have OSHA compliant work conditions. We have benefits. And one of the best things is people can live in Cuero or live in Victoria and drive to work every day. If you're constructing frames or putting on roofing in a new build neighborhood, right? When that neighborhood's done, you got to go someplace else. You'll see a lot of these are more sort of traveling jobs where the family lives someplace else and the earner is out at work for 4 days or 10 days or 21 days. So it's a very tough. It's not just is it hard work. I don't think Americans are afraid of hard work. It's hard work conditions because you're out working, you're out of doors, and the jobs are not in the same place every time. And it's relatively hard to have a career path. They're more of a once a framer, always a framer type role. Now in our factory, someone can go from working on frames to working on electricity. So all of these trades are on staff. So our plumbers are employees, our electricians are employees. Very different thing than you have if you're building homes on site.
Derek, I think in Texas we are pushing. I mean, whether it's conservatives or whoever, they are pushing. It seems like there's a positive movement towards, look, not everybody needs to go to college. Mm-hmm. It's not a bad thing, and we've talked about, technical training and learning skills and apprenticeships and things like that. And this could be one of those things where, somebody can go do an apprenticeship and learn how to build a house. Mm-hmm. And instead of incurring, $80,000 worth of debt, within 4 or 5 years, they could be making $80,000 because they know how to build a house and they're a foreman on a job or something like that.
Well, you're definitely not going to have any shortage of, I would say, need for that individual. I do think the point that Sean makes about I don't say transient because that's not necessarily the right word, but the relocating nature of the job is going to make it tough for that. But this kind of also goes to what we said about having a dynamic, cover most of the waterfront workforce in all parts of Texas, including rural Texas, where, again, the problem of folks moving to the big city because that's where the opportunity is and, decimating the rural communities is one that is assuaged when you have more viability in that rural community. I'm mm-hmm. thinking of, again, you mentioned the College for All example, somebody that goes and gets their electrician certificate. There are plenty of places out in rural Texas that they don't have a town electrician. They have to bring someone in from 2-3 towns over, maybe a county over. And I think that now, granted, there's no silver bullet. You can't just plant, there's no, electrician to rural Texas pipeline. But I think that there's a lot of things you can do, and that includes, to the point that we were discussing earlier, actually revitalizing the trades on that. Well,
Sean, we had a couple minutes left. I wanted to run some ideas by you and get your ideas, because we do, this is called The Right Idea, so we're looking for for positive solutions here, but one that is not a great solution at all, but was hotly debated over the last 4 or 5 months, was up in New York, and a guy that won the mayorship up there, and he's going to freeze the rent. How do you feel about rent freezing?
I mean, it's a fantastic way to get elected, right? We're going to have free groceries, free buses, and we're going to have free this and free that. And I think that younger people are upset, and I think this is a way to express them being upset. And I said this last week in an interview that, look, I think there's a feeling in the nation that people did what they were asked to do and they didn't get what they were promised. And I think that feeling is across a huge cross section of people, across genders and identities and races and socioeconomic classes. And I think there's some truth to it, right? That it's not fair, that the polarity of wealth is a dangerous thing. And so I think that freezing the rent sounds good. It's proven anybody with a year's worth of economics education will prove to you it doesn't work. That these same cities that are going to freeze the rent don't freeze escalations in property taxes. And so they they focus heavily on the revenue that the property owner is making, but they don't really publish how much of that revenue goes back into the city coffers or the state coffers, the school coffers. And they certainly don't want to freeze that part. They don't want to guarantee you that they won't raise your taxes. They just want to try to guarantee you that you won't raise your revenue. And the consequence of that is that they can't make you rent the house. They can't keep you from selling the house. So unfortunately, although it sounds good, it's been proven time and time again that it just decreases the number of homes available for rent, increases the homes available for sale. And when the homes are available for sale instead of for rent, it favors the higher earners, the higher socioeconomic group, and it hurts the lower socioeconomic group. Mm-hmm. Our business puts a family that can afford $2,000 a month in rent into a $350,000 home into a very high-end suburb. And our returns are like 5% or something. So it's like, It's not like there's some huge windfall in collecting rent. It's a good business, but it's certainly not NVIDIA. So I think it's going to, they'll toy around with it and figure out it doesn't work. Massachusetts I saw headlines today, they're close to passing a hard 5% cap on rent increases, but not any accompanying 5% cap on tax increases. Right. So it's just silliness. It doesn't make any sense.
So if you could wave a magic wand just real quickly here at the end of the show, if you could wave a magic wand and fix some policy or policies, what would be in your agenda?
It's all about access to credit. In the beginning of the show, you talked about we're going to change the cost to build the house. We have to change the cost to own the house, right? Taxes are a large share of the cost to own it. The labor cost and the regulatory piece is a large share of the cost to build it. But we didn't talk so much about the fact that it doesn't really matter if no one can get a mortgage to buy it. It doesn't really matter if you lower the cost to build it. And access to credit in this country has been reserved for the wealthy, and it's not the American way. And one of the crazier things that we let happen is we let this narrative of the subprime crisis, and we call it the subprime crisis, right? And what are we saying? We say subprime crisis. We're saying that the crisis was caused by people with low FICO scores. And that couldn't be any further from the truth. The crisis was not caused because we let someone with a credit score slightly below average buy a house. That was not anywhere near the problem. The problem was fraud. And I speak of this from a first person perspective of I bought a bunch of defaulted loans. I audited 80,000 of them, and I saw the fraud perpetrated by everybody involved in the process, from the borrower to the banker to the investment banker. That's what caused the financial crisis. It wasn't the fact that someone with a 675 FICO score got a loan. So if I could wave a magic wand, we'd rename the subprime crisis to the mortgage fraud crisis, and we would give people with below average FICO scores a chance to own a home.
There you go. There's our agenda for next year. Sean, this has been great. Thank you. We've used a lot of your time, and we really appreciate you making time for us. I think I've learned a lot and certainly got a lot of things to think about. So thank you for being with us on the show.
All right. Thank you, guys.
And thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. And as we always like to say in every episode, in the immortal words of Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.